Hey guys, what's up? This is Dan here, and I guess this is going to be the first part of a new series that I'm going to try out. I haven't got a name for it yet, so I'm going to call it something terrible right off the top of my head. I'm going to call it Inside the Sound. That's subject to change, so don't you worry about that. And over the past couple of weeks, when I've been thinking about kind of, let's say, relaunching Grapevine Recording, I've been searching for new ideas and new shows to try and, create new ideas and concepts to share with you. Not necessarily just trying to teach us things, but kind of showing, opening the door a little bit on my process and, some of the things that I'm doing. Again, not necessarily in a teaching kind of way, but just as a come and see what I'm looking at, come and see what I'm working on. What do you think? And maybe some of these ideas will open up discussions between us in the future. And this is one of them shows. This is one of them concepts that I was working on. And what it is basically is, as I'm working through a movie that I'm working on currently, if there are some things that I've done that I think are interesting or cool, I will kind of document them and kind of go back over to you guys and go, here, here's something I've worked on. Here's a sound that I've created for this bit of video. Here's what it sounds like at the end. Here's how I made it. Here's all the different layers that go into creating that sound, and here's the processing that I've done to achieve it. What do you think? If that makes sense. So, for a little bit of background, this movie is called Lead Me to the Dark. It is, I guess, like a vampire film. And there are a couple of sounds in this that I'm going to talk through, I guess. There are three primarily. The first one is this sound. It's the sound of... There's this kind of shot every now and again. And it's kind of a shot of, I guess, a sort of transformation between someone who is a human to a vampire. And it's kind of just teeth growing. Okay, so here it is. So that is the first sound. I kind of started on the most difficult one because this is actually a revision from an earlier sound, which is, I guess, this one. Nope, not that one. This one. And as you see, there are some kind of similarities, but it is different in its own way. When we've been discussing what the sound design direction of this movie is going to be, we know that there's going to be a contrasting look, I guess, between a dark and a light. So when we've been trying to create these sounds, we've looked at it to create a gritty, heavy bottom end and then a more glassy, sheeny top end. And seeing how we can make these, I guess, these sounds live with each other and, how we can make them blend and work well. So the tooth grind idea is primarily, I think it's 3 sounds for this. Let me just open up all these. Some of these probably won't exist in the final, but I'll just open them anyway, just so we can explain. So if I make these active, so this original teeth grow actually exists from 3 layers. There are let's just play through them individually. There are a few plugins on there that we'll just reactivate. That and that. So the first sound is this. Soloing. Which is it's actually a blade being drawn from a sample library that I have. So it's the sound of, I guess, like a knife getting unsheathed. So as you would imagine, if you think of any video game or the sound of a sword coming out of its scabbard, it's kind of got that whoosh type of sound. The sound of, I guess it would be the steel coming across the material of the scabbard. So it's got a kind of crunch, but it's quite high pitched. So what I've done, I've reversed it because I wanted it to kind of grow into the sound and not decay. So again, it sounds like this. So towards the end of it, you can actually hear the movement of that blade, but I thought when that links up with the motion of the teeth growing, I do believe that it works quite nicely. So it gets pretty interesting with this when we discuss. Actually, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go through each sound first before I actually go into what everything's doing. So here's the next sound, and the sound of that is actually a drill. So when I first started working on this sound in particular, I love the idea of, because it's to do with teeth. Now might be a little bit too conceptual, I guess, but because it was working with teeth, I really think that one of the most like iconic sounds for teeth is a dentist drill. That really high pitched whirling sound of a drill, and didn't have access to a dentist, so I couldn't go and record this sound. But I found that if I actually take the sound of a regular drill and pitch it up, you can actually create a sound that is somewhat similar. When it gets pitched up, a lot of the weight of the drill moves away, and of course it kind of sounds lighter and also sounds faster. So that's what I've done with that. Again, that's got HEQ and another bit of reverb on it. And then the final sound is, I guess, the crunch, I guess we could describe it as. And this might not make it into the final sound as it stands here. It actually might be a lot quieter. So that's this. And the reason why is that I think sometimes it can kind of feel as if it's a little bit too, I guess, lo-fi. And the sound of that is literally just two rocks getting dragged together. One of the main like sounds that we were discussing when we were working on this is the sound of, like rubble and bricks and rocks, and that sound of, the crunching of when a rock scrapes across another rock. The way I did that, though, I imported it into Contact and actually pitched it down using the keyboard in Contact, because I just felt that this was offering a much more a closer sound when it was getting pitched down than it actually did when I just used something like Verify or Sound Shifter. So together, as I say, they sound like this, and I do believe that rock sound will be altered somewhat. So that's just meant to, indicate the actual physicality of the tooth growing. If I just lower that down a little bit, you can kind of see how that might fit a little bit better in the context of what's going on. So this has got a compressor on it, H-Comp and Vitamin, just to kind of overexcite the top end a little bit to embellish the crunch. So when it comes down to the plugins, I think I've recently bought HEQ, and it is quickly becoming my favorite reverb of all. First of all, I'm a big fan of this type of graphical interface on an EQ anyway. I'm a huge fan of the Pro Tools EQ, and I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, I guess like a Neve or an SSL kind of EQ where it doesn't lay things out on a graph. It's just knobs. I'm not necessarily too fond of that. But the one thing that this EQ does, which I personally haven't found another EQ that does it, is it offers like a piano roll. So I can now tune in each band of the EQ to a specific note, and that is massive. That is really, really huge. And I know this is different because it's not music, and I'm sure that this has many more uses in music than it does in sound design for post-production. But what we managed to do is find out what the resonant sound of that blade is. So if you look on the frequency display here, if you look just where this yellow band is, you'll see at a definite peak, and that turns out to be F sharp. So I could tune in that band of EQ to an F sharp or 2,960 hertz and boost it there to embellish that, that frequency, that resonance. But also what I can do is move down into the previous octaves and also boost them resonances. So this is what it sounds like before it. And without. So it definitely adds, I think, to that kind of annoyance. You know, it really adds to the gleam of what we were saying. You know, that glassy overtone, and I think it really helps. It really helps boost it. The great thing is as well with this EQ is that the filters, Digital 2 can get a really narrow band, so you can actually boost them frequencies. I am going to talk a little bit more about this because we use it in a different way later on, and that just runs through an reverb. I've this is something that I think I've found a little bit difficult to move into the post-production world, is that there are quite a few conventions that I've discovered like in this process that I don't use as much as I used to. So like now I'm not that bothered about using a reverb or something, you know, like that on an insert. Like before I would always set up a reverb send to it. But because, especially the way this film has worked out, is the type of reverb that I've used on the top end of this sound is a different reverb than what I've used on, you know, the grinding sound or the drill sound. And before you know, I think if you were going to set up an auxiliary send and return for every single time you used a reverb, because all the reverb settings are so different, you'd just have your session would just be full of aux sends. So I was a little bit concerned at first that, you know, this wasn't the norm and this wasn't the way you meant to do it and conventions and all that. But yeah, don't worry about it. Like, I think you just work to the way that works well for you. Yes, this might not be the most resource friendly way of doing things, but for now it works. And there is something else that I will mention just once I've finished explaining this. So it's just basically a haul. It's quite a long, it's not a very long haul. It's 3 seconds. I've had a little bit of a pre-delay and changed the wet-dry balance. Also, with the EQ, I've rolled off some of the low end and just returned the high end back to where it should have been. Again, this adds a little bit more space to the sound that you will hear now. So I really wanted, you know, that final sound just to kind of flick out a little bit, and I think this reverb does that job very nice. So again, with the drill, it is a somewhat similar bit of information, but what I've done is tune these bands of the EQ to something a little bit different. So this actually is set to a E, and I can't quite remember why I did it. Is that... Yeah, I don't know why I did it. But if we listen, it just kind of tunes into that... what would the word be? It kind of tunes into that tone that lives within that sound. Let me higher up a little bit. It kind of adds a voice to it, I think, and it just really makes it uneasy. You know, it really adds a little bit of tension to the sound, and that was exactly what I wanted to do. Again, there's a reverb which would in turn, you know, do the same job as the other one was doing, so it just creates a little bit more space. I think this reverb is a little bit less. It's not as long as the last one. There's no pre-delay, and it's at 100% wet, because obviously pre-delay wouldn't affect that. So this is it without. And with. I think as well, you know, with the EQ kind of creating a voice in that sound, I think the reverb really makes it sound ghostly and you know, a little bit on the scary side. And then, as I say, with the grinding sound, I just added a compressor just to bring out a little bit more of the low like volume detail, and a I guess, a harmonic exciter just to excite them upper frequencies. So that's basically the sound. But what I was saying before is that another thing that I've done with this, and as you can see here, I've got a load of sends which bounce this out into a version down here. So that was one version, and that's another version. And that's what I was doing. Once I got a balance of a sound that I actually liked, I would just bounce it to a stereo track and have like a completed version of that sound. A good thing with this is because now I can make them other tracks inactive and the plugins inactive. And what I was saying before, that kind of makes me less concerned about how resource hungry my processing chains may be, because once I'm happy with them, I can basically deactivate them anyway. As you can see though, I do try and keep each individual layer together, just because I'm not actually mixing this. So once I've created all the sound effects, that then goes to someone else who will add the Foley and the dialogue and whatever. And then that will all be sent to a mixer who's actually going to mix this. So I just want to try and give them as much option as possible. Sometimes they might not like the way that EQ sounds, or they might not like the frequencies I've chosen to boost. They can just make their own changes later on. So it's just trying to keep our options open as much as possible, so as we get to the end of the project, it's more of an easy fix instead of me having to go back trying to remake it all again and so on and so forth. One other thing that I've said, instead of actually just I guess bouncing everything out, I've also used a lot of audio suite plugins, not necessarily on that sound, but for things like doors, people putting cups and stuff down. If I don't like the sound that I've originally got and I can just make a quick fix with an EQ, I won't put that EQ on the insert and then bounce it. I will just add it in on an audio suite and render it there and then. That's another like conformity, I guess, that I think has took me a little while to understand, is there's a lot more decision making going on. There's a lot more live and die by your decisions that you make, and I guess that down the line will make me more proficient and more will train my ear a little bit better to know straight away that once I'm happy with the sound, I actually trust that it is the right sound. So that's good. Let's move on. Let's move to the whole point of this was how this affects the second tooth growing. It is basically the same sound. The only difference being on this is I removed the grind and I've embellished the blade. And the whole reason for that is because this guy, I like to think, is a much more elegant version of, a much more, he's got different characteristics than the other character had, I think. And the other character seemed a lot more brutal and hard hitting, so I wanted to keep that kind of the lo-fi grungy rock crunching kind of sound, where with this guy seemed a lot more suave, a lot more elegant. So we just stuck with the we brought out the blade and the sheen more for this character, which is pretty good. I think adding these variations is a really good way for us to kind of keep a sound somewhat familiar, but change it just enough for each character so it doesn't get repetitive. One other thing that we're bringing into this is we're actually going to be tuning a lot of these sounds based on the HEQ piano roll. So for characters that are good characters, we're EQing a lot of their effects to like major scales, and for characters that are darker or more evil or more sinister, we're actually going to be tuning them to minor scales just to add subtle auditory hints throughout the movie, which I think is a pretty good idea, and something that so far has worked quite well for us. So that's that sound. So that's a sound that's basically many elements brought together. There's another sound that I actually is one of my favorite sounds in this, and I will explain why it's one of my favorite sounds. It is for the knife reveal. So if we move into this knife reveal, which is a droning type sound, Is that the right one? Yep. So it sounds like this. Bit of backstory on this sound is when discussing what type of thing we're going to be doing with the sound design of this movie, we kind of want to remove ourselves from a lot of the tropes of Hollywood. So we didn't want an overly, someone equipping a knife. We didn't want that, that sound of a knife getting unsheathed. Although we used it in the previous sound, we kind of, spun it on its head, quite literally in that sense, by reversing it. So with this, I wanted to create a more tension-filled sound, and I thought that a drone that could be automated, to come out and build the tension would be something that I think would work well. And what I did is, I don't know whether you could, I'm sure some people would have understood what that sound was when you heard it, but that's the sound of someone running the finger around the top of a wine glass. And this is probably the proudest sound effect I've ever made in my life. And it's only because I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to make that, that resonance come out of a wine glass. So when I actually finally figured out how to do that and tried and made it work, I was extremely proud of myself. So what I've done with this sound, unfortunately, I can't keep going. I can't give auditory examples of what I've... audio examples, of what I've done with this, because this was primarily all audio suited, and I don't think any of these sounds are actually in the clip bin anymore. But I can explain what I've done. Let me just have a quick listen to this first of all, because I've got a feeling that this actually was not the original sound. I think this has already been processed in one way or another. Which it has. So what I've done with this is I've added a lo-fi plugin, and I used it originally as an insert because I'm a big fan of the Air lo-fi. I think some of the options on this are really good. The way the sample rate works is really, really nice. The clip distortion and things are absolutely amazing. The only problem with that is I couldn't use it as an audio suite because the Air plugins actually don't work as an audio suite. So what I did, instead of actually bouncing it through the insert, I made a decision to actually use the Avid regular lo-fi for this. And this kind of doesn't really work in the same way as the other one does. I couldn't quite get the same type of sound. This one ended up being a little bit more... the sound would break the lower I pushed it, which I'll explain to you right now. So with this, when I lower the sample rate, it doesn't go as high as the other one does. The other one went up to 50 kilohertz. So if we play this, I'll start lowering it, and you can hear pretty much straight away how much the sound will break apart. As I'm sure you can hear, it doesn't add that kind of the sheen distortion that the other one did. So when you think this one offered this kind of sound. Sorry if that sound is super annoying, but I think with this one you got more of that glitchy distortion in the top end, and it's actually weirdly quite pleasant in a way, where I think the other one is very harsh and not very pleasant at all. So I ended up finding a way to make that other plugin work, but I had to just use the effect a lot less. After that, I added a little bit of modulation. I added I believe it was from Waves, and it was the Meta Flanger. So I added that just to add a little bit more movement between the original. So as the time went on, it would kind of add a little bit more movement and modulation. Then I used a reverb, and the whole reason why I used a reverb is similar to the other ways. I wanted to create something that was a little bit more airy, a little bit more ghost-like, I guess. And that was the best way to make that work. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of a problem, and you might hear it at the end of this. If you just try and pinpoint the pitch of this and hear how it goes at the end, you might hear the pitch kind of start to drop at the end. It kind of goes at the bottom, and that was really annoying. I really liked the performance, I guess, of me playing the glass, but because of the physicality of how you move your finger around the glass, the pitch would kind of oscillate a little bit between when I was moving my finger forward and when I was moving my finger backwards. And it just so happened that where I cut the audio was as it started to go to pitch down. And I wasn't really a big fan of that, and it didn't quite match the picture at all. So what I've done, I put a reverb on it to try and extend the tail of that sound. And I think it worked quite well. I had to actually render one reverb, which was a quite a short reverb. I think it was about 4 seconds, so it's not super short. So it's about 4 seconds, and it was quite lo-fi, so it still brought a lot of its own like algorithmic distortions into it, which I liked. But again, it would just focus too much on that down pitch. So what I did to rectify that was, I'll just show it on this, but obviously it wasn't exactly like that. So say, for example, this part of the audio is the bit which would lose pitch. What I did was basically lowered that back so it would just cut off abruptly. But what I would do is put an extremely long reverb on it. So again, this is still 100% wet. It's all on the insert like chain. And basically, so when it gets to this, it doesn't continue playing the next bit. It was just playing the tail of the reverb from what was primarily in this area. And that was the best way around it. You know, if you listen to this, I don't believe that this will have that pitch drop in it. And it just meant that I had to put an extremely long reverb on. And as you can see towards the end here, I had to just fade that away. See what I mean? I'll just play it a little bit louder. And that was it. So obviously it got rid of that pitch drop. I've also EQ'd this. I kind of brought up some of the high end a little bit, removed all of the rumble. Because I recorded this with a microphone in my room, there was some room noise and stuff like that of like computers and whatnot. So I took out a lot of that low end. And yeah, I do believe that it works pretty well, and I'm extremely proud of it. The final sound, I guess, is the sound of the transformation. So there are a couple of ideas that went round with this, and I believe that this is the sound that we decided upon. So this is obviously the sound of the girl turning into a vampire. The sound that we went for was kind of a fire mixed with a drone. The fire, obviously figuratively, was more like a burning. You know, we wanted that sound of like, you know, when you look at the picture, there's a lot of like reds. There's a lot of somewhat fire elements, I guess you would explain it as. So that seemed like a natural fit for that. And the Doom drones, which were these. Oh, these, sorry. Which were that. And then the fire barrel, which is this. Easy as you like, really. What I've done with this, I'm just trying to find... oh, sorry. I'm very, very sorry. There is another sound, and this is the most important sound for this, I believe, which is that rise and pitch sound that you can hear in the back. But this sound itself is actually just this. And again, it's just a riser, like distorted type sound. There's a little bit of automation on the clip gain, just because as it's building up in volume, it naturally does that anyway. I just wanted to even it out, so it kind of stayed, I guess, static, as it's called. So what I've done with this, if you look at the pitch, if you look at the EQ, sorry, I've just kind of done some broad stroke EQ, which is that. And the most important part of this is the pitch plugin. It is automated. If I just open up the automation. And it's automated differently on the left and the right. And the reason for this is that... the reason for this primarily is because when I was writing in the automation, I didn't realize that this was actually a stereo plugin, and I assumed that if I wrote a bit of automation on the left-hand side, it would have automatically copied it to the right, which isn't the case. So at first, it was only the left-hand side of the signal that was actually rising in pitch, and I actually really like the fact that it starts beating. So because one pitch is rising against the other one, and it's still only within a pretty small distance, you actually get this weird stereo effect, and I actually really, really liked it. So instead of just leaving it like that, I thought I would over-exaggerate the right-hand side to kind of give that kind of effect. But also, I found that when the pitch was rising, it added like a level of strain. If you imagine an old teapot boiling. So obviously, as it boils, the pitch starts to rise and rise, and it really starts to add tension and a strain, and I really, really liked it. So I added that in, so that sounded like this. I'm just going to remove that other EQ for now. So it kind of, builds and starts to rise, and then with that EQ, it's this. So with that together, I think it all started to add, the elements that I think we needed. It added the fire of the fever. It added the drone of the demonic drone, and it added the distortion riser, which kind of added the strain and the tension and things like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually play this in different styles, I guess. So we've got, if we play just the fire and the drone, we have this. It's relatively straightforward. If we play the fire and the distortion, and I really just think that it just adds it all together. All individual elements just really, really sell it. I think they all need to be there, and they all add something unique, and it's just a perfect, I guess, combination of stuff that really is what that picture needs. So finally, it sounds like this. And that's basically it. They're the main three sounds that I think, at least in the first reel, are the most interesting to talk about. I'm sure it's going to take a while for me to get back into the way of explaining these type of things without mumbling on or things like that. But I really want to try and show my process to people. I really want to share that kind of thing with you. I'm sure I can always be more concise and I can always be more to the point, but I think sometimes there is no reason for doing something, and I think that's something I've learned quite a lot in the past couple of weeks. Sometimes experimentation is the thing that really, really just hits inspiration, and I think being inspired is the most important thing, and following something down the rabbit hole is extremely important. And I think, you don't have to sit there and explain why you use something on an insert instead of on a send, or why you used one plugin over the other, because I think at the bottom line, it doesn't really matter. I think the most important thing is that you've created something that you like the sound of, and regardless of how you got there, who cares? Yes, you can always do it cleaner, you can always do it more efficiently, you can always do it faster, or, with a higher level of technical accuracy. But who cares, man? Who cares? At the end of the day, we created something that wasn't there before, that now is, and fits in my opinion, fits the picture the way it should. And I don't think it matters whether I used one EQ over the other, frankly. But that's in my opinion. These are the three sounds that I wanted to point out to you. Hopefully you will like this. If you didn't like it and you would like me to go back to more tutorial based stuff, please let me know. I'm extremely interested in your opinion of this. You know, if you like these sounds, please let me know. If you think that I could have done it better, and you think that perhaps a certain sound or a certain way of processing it would have improved that sound, again, please let me know, because I am all ears. If there was anything that you wanted me to recap on or explain in better depth, please let me know. I'll try and keep these videos coming. But as I say, when I work on future reels of this film, or maybe, you know, other movies in the future, and I do something that I actually really like the process or the sound of, I will show you, and hopefully together we can all, you know, improve. But yeah, this has been Dan with GrapeVineRecording. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you all in the next episode. Bye bye.